Hey guys, so today is the last episode of the Dear Evan Hansen analysis. I had a lot of fun putting this together, and for the last time, if you like One Sock Radio, but YouTube is not the place you want to listen to it on, no worries, because there's actually a bunch of other sites that One Sock Radio is streaming on. If you go to anchor.fm/one-sock, all lowercase, you can find pretty much all the other platforms that One Sock Radio is on. You can also listen to episodes right there on anchor.fm. It's really convenient, and that's it. I hope you enjoy the final episode. Dear Evan Hansen is a musical with book by Stephen Levinson, with music and lyrics by Benj Pasek and Justin Paul. Copyright is reserved by these names. The Dear Evan Hansen script is published by Theater Communications Group. Attention! The following episode contains references of suicide, so if you may be sensitive to this topic, please change the podcast now. Thank you, and enjoy. Before this episode begins, I would like to remind my audience that this is purely my interpretation of the show Dear Evan Hansen, and it is completely possible you can come to different conclusions or read different things between the lines. Again, this is a script analysis. Conclusions built on evidence from the script obtained through thorough investigation. And as art is incredibly subjective, different people can see different things from the evidence. Hello and welcome to One Sock Radio. I am your host, Cody Novotny.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. It is time for a little chat. Sit back and relax. How about that? Make some breakfast and a cup of joe. Take some sips. And on we'll go. Enjoy!
At this point, you will have noticed that some of my concepts or conclusions have altered slightly as this analysis continues. And that is something I wanted to show off. That the more you come to understand about a piece, the more your conclusions will begin to shift, either slightly or dramatically. And that is something that comes with analyzing a piece of art. You will never fully understand it. I know of professors who have had a specialty in shows or whatever you call it. Actually, one of my sister's professors, their thing was Hamlet. And I bet you, to this day, they're still discovering more about that piece. I don't think Shakespeare would have anticipated that Hamlet would have had decades worth of analysis material. That even though I have spent 7 full episodes up to this point discussing Dear Evan Hansen, I'm not going to claim that I understand every branching concept that the show brings up. I bet you that some of the conclusions I have made weren't even intended conclusions by the brilliant minds behind this piece. I bet if Stephen Levinson, Benj Pasek, or Justin Paul, if either of them listened to this podcast, they'd probably think, whoa, that is way off. That's not what we meant at all. But that's the beauty of subjectivity. One person sees a cloud, another sees a bunny. A painter creates a tree, the viewer sees a face. That's what makes art so difficult to express, because you can never anticipate what your audience is going to take away from it, what they're going to read into. So when you see my conclusions change between episodes, that isn't me lacking in the consistency department. That is me showing you how my interpretations are changing as I write these episodes. That not only am I understanding more with using different techniques, but the simple act of writing down my thoughts also allow the facts to be plainly seen, for more detail to be added to the bigger picture. Anyway, enough about that. Let's talk about Evan, the anxious, tree-loving, Connor Project founding high school senior. You know, One of my favorite criticisms of the original cast and now the movie cast is how the student characters look really old. As if some people in high school don't look like they're already in their late 20s. Seriously, when was the last time you saw an upperclassman high schooler and they didn't look like they were about to graduate college instead of high school? Like, these kids mature physically extremely quick in these years of their life. Some of my friends had full beards and were built like tanks. Now, some of the most overlooked aspects about Evan's character is, why does he keep telling the lie? Is there a reason why his cast comes off in the second act? Also, don't forget that he stops taking his medication in the second act as well. Or the question on if he is doing all this for intentional personal gain. You know what? We'll bring up these questions as they come up. Buckle up because I anticipate this is going to be a long episode. First of all, why does Evan have this social anxiety? It could be written off as a medical disorder, a simple plot device. But it's clearly an important aspect to the character, otherwise, why would they bring it up? Why would it be so important that Levinson is pretty much beating it into you? And equal in importance, why is it cured? We aren't given a whole lot of previous action for Evan other than he attempted suicide, he worked as an assistant park ranger, and his father left when he was 7. And as the main character, that makes it very difficult to find the root of his anxiety. But I believe that waving through a window helps us in that. Waving Through a Window is a piece that, as Pasek and Paul put it, is the character's I want song. Evan is so scared of failing, he doesn't want to try at all. When he says that he is waving through a window in Scene 1, Act 1, that shows he is staying in his comfort zone. But yet he still wants people to see him. He's in a house of some kind or looking through a phone, which is a piece of imagery that Pasek and Paul really wanted to hit home. And Evan is watching the world pass by him. He dreams of there being a place for him in this world, and that moment when he starts to feel like he can have a place or that there is a spot for him, he gets shut down, continuing to wonder if his miseries are even seen. Now, remember how with Connor we connected his issues with something that happened in his past? I believe we can do this with Evan as well. His father leaving being the driving force behind his anxiety. When he was 7, he was worried that his mother was going to leave too, showing us that when he got close to someone, they left, and he feared it was going to happen again. Which explains why he has such a connection with Larry. And like with Connor, this fear of Evan's grew and evolved over the years, and his fight or flight response is, well, we don't know at this point, because he never lets himself get into those kinds of situations. He doesn't try. But when he does and finds himself in these situations, he fights. Like Connor, but verbally instead of physically. He tries to prove other people wrong so he can look like he is in the right. And this is a point when his anxiety starts to build back up at the end of the show after it was cured. First of all, how do I know it was cured in the first place? There is one thing that Heidi mentions only twice in the entire show. The fact that she mentions it at all in a minimalistic theatrical production such as this should catch the eye of any theater patron, regardless of how many times it's mentioned. Evan's medication. In the first act, she asks if he needs a refill, and he says no, but it's clear he's still taking them. Clear because in the second act, when it is brought up again, he makes the distinction that he is not taking them anymore. It's through this exchange that we learn that the pills are for his anxiety, and something else Heidi is about to say but doesn't. But we can assume it's depression due to what Evan has done in previous actions. He isn't taking the pills anymore because he doesn't need to. So what happens between these moments in Act 1 and Act 2? A lot is the short answer. A lot. Evan and Jared begin the emails. He and Zoe start having a relationship. Evan creates the figment of Connor in his mind. And the big one, the Connor project begins. So what here does the trick for Evan? My interpretation is that it's something that connects all of this together. Evan is writing a story. Heidi says on several occasions that Evan is a gifted writer. So it's no surprise to me that writing is Evan's outlet. For Forever comes just before the first mention of the pills. But it is a really good example of how telling this story leads Evan to a relaxed state. At first, he needed some encouragement to start it off. Cynthia feeding him the information about the orchard and the ice cream shop. And after that, Evan takes off on his own. To add in a bit of musical analysis, look at every moment that the role has these ridiculous high A-B belts. They are all at moments of high emotion. Waving through a window, yearning, words failed, despair. For Forever, freedom. This is the first time he talks about climbing the tree and seeing the sun. Now, when is the next time we see this referenced? At the end of the show, when the weight of the lie is lifted off his shoulders, when everyone can see that, pun intended, can see a bright future. Whether he recognizes it consciously or not, I believe this is the first time Evan finds that outlet. Now, I always wondered why Evan told this story in For Forever, as if it really happened. Why he got so into it, but if this is the first time he feels free from the restraints of his anxiety and depression, it makes complete sense. Whenever you find that outlet that helps you escape, whether it's writing or music, movies, theater, video games, whatever, you don't want it to stop. That feeling of being free, it's like a drug. Evan makes a life-altering discovery in this moment, but it's a shame that he doesn't recognize it. The anxiety does get cured in the show, but it also comes back. Good for You is pretty much that moment. The story is no longer growing or expanding, it's looping on itself. Inconsistencies are found, and no longer is he able to write with no avail. He gets restrictions. It's like withdrawal from the freedom. He lashes out, cuts ties on anyone that takes that freedom and comfort from him. Now, I make this sound like it is something that is very clear, but it really isn't. I only discovered this through reading very deeply into the lines. It's obvious he starts cutting ties, but the first assumption that I came to was that it was something his growing ego did, that Evan was becoming arrogant or blind with power. But I believe now that it is deeper rooted than that. And his whole world comes crashing down during Words Fail. And it seems like he is back to square one, but when we see him a couple months later, he seems to be doing better. Significantly different from the start of the show. Though the show doesn't tell us what happened between So Big, So Small and the final French scene, what we do know is that he has gotten better with his social anxiety. He has a job now, in retail no less. And you can see that he is more confident in the words he chooses. Before this moment, he would start one or two different versions of the same sentence before choosing one to go with. Now, he rarely stutters. But his anxiety and pills weren't the only things that stood out to me. The cast is an important costume piece, one that is specifically mentioned in the stage directions and is even on every single piece of promotional material. So, Why is the cast so significant? I believe the cast is symbolic of his depression. Have you noticed how a cast forces your thumb to be up? At least that is the case in the poster. An international gesture for "I'm okay." In reality, Evan needs things to help him stay afloat. In Act 1, it is medical and professional help. Connor signs his name onto a temporary thing, something that goes away when people have healed. Something that isn't said in the script, at least the one I have, so I can't really include this in my script analysis of the show. But in the second act, the cast is gone. And with it, unfortunately, the last of Connor. I hesitantly bring up this aspect of the show because I know it is something that people always choose to complain about. The fact that Connor is fully forgotten by the second act, and this fake one takes place. But it's true. The real Connor rarely gets talked about in the second half of the show. But even there, it was specifically how Cynthia and Larry dealt with him, not about him per se. But in the end of the show, my interpretation shows that Cynthia and Larry know what about their son is real and what wasn't because of their return to the orchard for picnics. Something their family used to do together. The good memories. But, like I said, I really don't like talking about this because I know it's a sensitive subject of the show. However, if we are going to talk about Evan, we need to talk about the fictional version of Connor that inhabits his mind. I believe this version of Connor is just an extension of Evan, not a ghost or a memory or anything of the sort. Let's look at when it first shows up, when the mass school morning is over and people are starting to move on, when Elena questions Evan's devotions to Connor's memory, after he kisses Zoe. The big thing that this manifestation talks about is help for the Murphys and also the selfless need to prove that everyone matters. Although this need also derives from the fear of being forgotten. Evan sees himself as being in this group of people who are easily forgotten, something brought up in Waving Through a Window. Clearly, this is a plot device to help us see into Evan's mind, to understand why he chooses to make some of these decisions. But not in the way we would expect. The big reveal about how Evan broke his arm is given through one of these conversations with fake Connor. Evan keeps telling himself that he fell, but the figment reveals that he let go. He attempted suicide. This is huge because it proves to us and the audience that Evan is able to lie to himself. But what does this have to do with fake Connor? Well, the figment is constantly telling Evan that he needs to keep the lie going for the Murphys, for the world, but what is really going on here? The fake Connor is another instance where Evan is lying to himself. Lying to himself about the real motives behind his actions, the ones that are dressed in a disguise that makes it look like it is for Connor and his family. Need more proof? Let's look at what happens when Connor disappears during Words Fail. Evan stops talking about how he wanted to be a part of the Murphys, how they gave him everything he wanted. That through telling this lie, he forgot who he really was. He put himself in a narrative that made him someone he wanted to be. And in the end, he no longer sees a bright future. His anxiety comes back, and so does his depression. If he saw this coming, if he knew what he was doing was wrong, why did he keep telling the lies? Aside from the massive amount of personal gain and outlet discovery. Well, for one, it's absurdly obvious that Evan has terrible social anxiety. And because of which, he has very little knowledge of how to deal with social situations. We know through a conversation with Jared, Scene 5, Act 1, that Evan was captured by Cynthia's powerful sadness. He noted that when she saw the cast, her face lit up with an emotion he could only connect with good. He knew that through telling this lie, it made the Murphys happy. It saved them from the torture of that painful loss. So, Evan continues to lie every time he sees them start to reel back into the darkness. In Scene 6, when Cynthia and Zoe start fighting, Evan begins to tell them about the time at the orchard. In Scene 11, when Zoe starts to pull back from asking about her position in the letter, Evan begins to tell her everything that Connor felt about her. When everyone begins to move on from Connor, Evan creates the idea of the Connor Project to keep his memory alive, which in turn lifts the Murphys' spirits even higher. And in the end, why does Evan finally decide to tell the truth? Because Cynthia and Larry start clawing at each other's throats and blaming each other and themselves. We have established that this isn't Evan's only motivating factor in telling the lie, but I believe that it is one that is grossly overlooked. Similarly, I believe that the fact that Evan having multiple driving factors behind his actions are grossly overlooked. Something I've noticed with every story that Evan tells about Connor, that he incorporates something that happened to him or feelings he's had. If I Could Tell Her is clearly Evan projecting his feelings for Zoe through the mouth of Connor. Before that, he claims he broke his arm climbing a tree with Connor, and according to Jared, Evan says that Connor loved trees, but we know that Evan has a huge infatuation with trees and never gets to talk about it because naturally his peers find it boring. So he found an outlet to talk about trees through his conversations with Connor. Evan finds so many different ways to express stuff or bury stuff through these stories he tells about Connor. Perhaps they are utilized to make the stories seem more real. You know what they say, write what you know, because keeping stories in familiar territory allows you to have control and continue to have it for a while. But I also find this was a type of therapy for Evan. He had several pent-up feelings and thoughts and desires that the lie helped him express. He was able to get his infatuation with Zoe off his chest by telling her everything he liked about her by disguising it as Connor's thoughts. Being able to finally talk about the trees, like I said, he got to experience what it was like to have friends through Elena and Jared, and of course, the discovery of the outlet of his anxiety. On the continuing theme of Evan's massive amount of reasons for pursuing the lie, was the personal gain of them. My belief is that he didn't tell the lie for the personal gains, but he did continue to tell it to keep them. There are two moments that really push this thought. The first one being Only Us. This song is Zoe telling Evan that she doesn't want their relationship to be about Connor, the project, and all that. Just to be about them. Evan later admits to continually talking about it as a, quote, reason to not let him go. Scene 4, Act 2. So we can say definitely that Evan was using the story to keep Zoe with him. The other moment was Words Fail. I know I said earlier that I believe the reasons at the beginning of this song weren't the real reasons behind the lie, but I do believe there were some truth to them. Through telling the lie, he gained access to a family environment that he always wanted. A father that stays and a mother who is always around. For someone like Evan who desires stuff like this, getting it is a dream come true, and keeping it is a necessity. The fact it was brought up in the state of floundering is important. Again, keep in mind that Pasek and Paul specifically had Evan say this. So regardless to what degree, it was an aspect behind his decisions. I don't believe Evan had the foresight to see him getting this out of telling the lie. But I do believe that a portion of his rationale was that if he keeps the lie, he keeps the family. Something else about Evan I think is worth talking about is his relationship with those that aren't the Murphys. That is, Jared, Elena, and Heidi. With Evan being the main character, the show kind of revolves around him, the choices he makes, and the relationships he has. We've already talked about him and the choices he makes, so naturally, the last thing left that I want to talk about are the relationships. Since we talked about him first in the podcast, let's talk about him first here too. Jared Kleinman. Evan seems to be comfortable around Jared despite the insults and sarcasm. Between him, Elena, and Zoe in the first scene when he is asking people to sign his cast, Jared is the one he is most comfortable asking. There aren't any stutters or instant regrets. Evan even gives the thought that he and Jared are friends. The comfortability goes further when Evan goes to Jared to talk about his problems, to help write the emails, and even asks him to join the Connor project. Evan clearly sees Jared as a friend, or at least a trusted acquaintance. Later on in the show, Evan stops becoming so open with Jared and chooses to internalize these thoughts, making him grow more distant with him. He even appears to become threatened by Jared when he attempts to insert himself into the story. Continuously after this, Jared points out the bad stuff Evan is doing, and with growing tensions, Evan chooses to point out that Jared can't do anything because he is doing bad, possibly worse things. Rather than accepting the blame in this situation, he chooses to push it onto someone else. Evan's relationship with Elena is one that hinges on the lie. Because aside from the first day, which she spends talking about herself mostly anyway, they only ever talk about Evan's connection with Connor. And after that, it's only about Connor. It doesn't even seem that Evan really means for Elena to be as relevant as she is. More of her forcing herself into Evan's life exclusively for the sake of Connor. The main difference between Elena and Jared with Evan is that Jared seems to, in a strange way, care about Evan, whereas Elena doesn't. She is cold and calculated and only cares about the Connor project once she is put on board. Which is probably why Evan questions her real motives behind her involvement with the project. And, to be fair, even if Evan wasn't about to be on a borderline panic attack, I would be questioning Elena's involvement as well. If you were to look at Elena from Evan's point of view, it does look like she is working dangerously unemotionally. Not really recognizing that she's talking about a kid who killed himself in front of someone who is understood to be his best friend. This is still within the year, and the best friend of a suicide victim would still be extremely sensitive about this. And she's talking about it as if it's nothing. Like it's something that happened on a TV show. My point is, Elena does seem very suspect. We know that she has real reasons behind it, but Evan doesn't. When she starts pointing out inconsistencies, he defends himself and reflects the interrogation back at her to put her under suspicion to take him out of it. In my opinion, as an outsider, Evan's accusations do seem kind of sound, even if they aren't true. The final relationship I want to talk about is between Evan and his mother, Heidi. Evan's relationship with his mother is pretty typical. The parent is doing everything in their power to help out their kid, but the kid doesn't see how much that is. He really doesn't listen to her, and we can see this because of the times she tells him to order food for himself, which can easily be passed off as his anxiety preventing him. He does get upset when she can't follow through with bonding time promises, and it does clearly affect him on how little he gets to see of her because of how he interacts with Cynthia and Larry. Being able to experience a contrasting family dynamic, Evan slips into this common trope between child and parent. There is a reason why this is a cliche in stories, because it happens frequently in real life. Kids get so caught up in the fantasy of this perfect alternate reality that they neglect to see what their family is doing for them in the real one. We can see how far he slips into this fantasy when he has the argument with Heidi in Act 2, Scene 7. But I believe the story turns around for Evan and his mother. After words fail, Heidi has a real heart-to-heart with Evan, and he learns how much she loves him. And through So Big, So Small, he learns how much she does for him, and how much she will continue to do for him. And now, to the final question. I know, you don't want this episode to end. So, what role does Evan play in Dear Evan Hansen's main action? Evan is one of my favorite roles because of how complex he is, with having 1.5 million reasons behind his actions and struggling with social anxiety and depression. Evan starts the conversation behind the morality of this kind of a situation. When the show is a social commentary about people taking advantage of a tragedy, Evan is the one who leaves you wondering what reasons justify someone using something like this to promote an idea or a concept. If your answer is, it depends, the show did its job. No matter if you think Evan deserved the mercy he got at the end of the show, if it started a conversation on what is appropriate with a tragedy, that is the aim. I don't believe the show is primarily attempting to teach you anything or to prompt the question, what are the lies we tell ourselves? Like I said at the beginning, I believe the show is a social commentary about the moral dilemmas of tragedy. I also believe the show is about forgiveness and who deserves mercy. Evan serves as the driving factor of these concepts, with every other character adding additional bullet points, while also serving as plot devices. Evan finds that he and Connor had something in common. They both felt insignificant. So he decided to utilize his understood position as Connor's best friend to push the idea that everyone matters and no one is invisible. And in this noble and primarily selfless project, he makes some morally questionable decisions. Evan's social message is structured on a lie, yes, but that doesn't make it any less significant. Keep that in mind. The internet, the one character we aren't going to dedicate a whole episode to, still thinks that Evan is Connor's best friend. They still believe the message he told, even if he told the Murphys the truth. The internet never learns it. That is another reason why the Murphys never told the truth about the letter, because they saw how the project's message moved the world and saved people from this depressive concept of insignificance. And that is the question that Evan's story brings up. Even through all the wrongs he did, he still accomplished a remarkable feat, social betterment. But does that mean he deserved mercy? And on that note, we conclude the final episode of this episodic analysis of Dear Evan Hansen. I hope you enjoyed it. I really do. I had a blast putting this thing together. And there's still a metric crap ton of stuff I still haven't talked about. Like, why are the scenes broken up the way that they are? What are some moments expressed? Why are some moments expressed with lines and others with song? What is the world of Dear Evan Hansen? And I would love to talk about all that stuff as well, but if by some miracle I get the opportunity to work on a production of the show, well, I'm sure you understand. Besides, I feel like these conversations about the characters are a bit more interesting to listen to than these other things. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. Let me know. Like I said, this was an experimental project where I analytically look at scripts. I've played with the idea of doing movies and video games as well as scripts, but we'll see what happens down the road. Anyway, let me know what you think by giving this podcast a rating, or find the episodes on my YouTube channel, OneSock, and leave a comment. I'll be excited to hear your thoughts on the podcast, condemning or not. If all goes according to plan, this episode should be releasing the same week as the Dear Evan Hansen film, so let me know if you're planning on seeing it. I obviously am. But because I am big dumb and got August and September mixed around, this series is finishing off in August rather than in September like I would have liked. But whatever, man. And tell me, what are some of your thoughts with the concepts that are brought up in each episode? Like, do you agree with my position on Jared feeling like he's slowly becoming a best friend with Evan because of writing it first person of Connor? And all other stuff. I can't think of any off the top of my head because I decided to go off script like a lunatic. But I really did have a lot of fun making this, and I want more than anything to start a discussion with you guys that are listening. So if you're familiar with the show and you have your own thoughts on stuff that I talked about, let me know. Tell me about your thoughts. Let's start a discussion. Let's talk about Dear Evan Hansen. And on that note, I think I should probably conclude the final episode on Dear Evan Hansen. As always, before I leave, you are valid whether you like the show or not. Just remember, ask the wise, don't criticize. Have a good one.
Your company was just swell. I hope you enjoyed our little pray. Please have a good morning and a wonderful rest of your day.
Hey, you stayed till the end. Look at you. No, I'm kidding. I'm not going to patronize you. So also by the time this episode comes out, this is kind of like a postscript type of a deal here. I will be getting ready to go back to university. So, you might not see another addition to the series, for a couple months if you did enjoy it. So I just wanted to give you all a heads up on that one. That is all. Now go to the credits. One Sock Radio is self-produced, with readings, script, and music by me, Cody Novotny.